Welcome everyone to What the Force, and welcome to a interesting episode where we are going to talk about the legacy of Jango Fett. And with me is Taylor Foreman Nico, who is also a writer for What the Force. And I'm so glad to have you on the show because you had written that amazing article on Jango and Boba Fett.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm very excited to be here.
This whole idea has been massively expanded with the latest season of The Mandalorian. And we both really wanted to dig into what the new information means for like the whole Fett line. We'll get into how complex that is in a moment. But I think that it just has a lot in there. Don't you think?
I think, yeah, definitely. I think thematically, I mean, there's just a lot. It's a rich, fertile ground that I hope that they explore in an interesting and nuanced way. Because I think there's a lot of stuff to be said about like legacy and identity and these different themes that are very powerful and inherent in Star Wars as a whole. And I think that Boba, now that he has his own show coming up, is going to be a good character to explore these, especially as like a sort of tandem story to the Mandalorian.
There were several moments in this episode or in this season where Boba's legacy and like Jango's legacy specifically have been brought up, not only with the sort of armor being reiterated that it was originally Jango's, the code that's in the armor basically saying this is encoded to my family. The jabs from the other Mandalorians saying that
Bo-Katan.
saying that, oh, he's just your donor. He's not actually your dad, there's a lot going on in the show. And also like even Boba himself is like, I think my face will be recognized. It's like,
it's great.
They're layering it in.
great bit of clone humor. I was happy to see in the show.
Yeah, there was a lot of like shout outs to especially Attack of the Clones because of the Boba Jango connection, and it had way more associated with it than I was picturing it would.
It's very strange. Not that they shun away from this, but for whatever reason, I don't know if it's just because of my age at the time, I'm always like weirdly excited when any sort of prequel material shows back up in anything, any part of modern Star Wars. I know we all freaked out when was it The Force Awakens when Kylo says like a clone army or something, he mentions it and I was like, oh my God.
That was very good Kylo, by the way.
Oh, thank you. And it reminds me of this, all the stuff that harkens back to that. I think they'll have to definitely connect to the prequel trilogy because Jango is so, even though he's so, he appeared so briefly, is so inherent in that story and that timeline. And especially if they explore more of that legacy in the expanded like new canonical books or in new comics and stuff, they'll definitely have to use that time period and explore it more thoroughly now.
Yeah, and they have the opportunity to potentially go back to Jango's childhood because he was just this guy that existed, a simple man trying to make his way in the universe. Like,
yes. Well, that's what I wanted to talk to you about because I was thinking, as I got prepared for this, I reread a lot of this stuff and, canonically now we have very little, given the, after the Disney purchase, they did their new canon. The Legends content is mainly what we have of Jango. So like we have very little canonical knowledge of Jango. So that's why for me as like a lifelong Boba Fett fan and then a Jango fan as I was a little older, it meant a lot because, all that stuff with Concord Dawn and Jaster May Reel, that was very much tied to the Legends canon. And that was like even new Legends canon in terms of the Jaster May Reel being his mentor, because originally Jaster May Reel was the true name of Boba Fett, which, we can get into that if you want.
No.
He was very boring. He was very puritanical and boring. So
I don't think that they're going in that direction, though.
Oh, no, I'm glad they're not.
Yeah, I think that they're going in this new sort of like, what is this baggage in the shape of Jango Boba armor like mean to the galaxy? And like Boba Fett is, as of the canon verse, what we know of him in especially the original trilogy time period, or the Age of Rebellion is what it's called now officially, is not a good person. Like, he is not.
I could argue that, but no, I'm joking. I remember these remind me of conversations I had with my mom back then, when she'd be like, well, he's a villain, and I always see him on the dark side sign and all like the board games, and be like, well, no, technically he's a bounty hunter, so he's more of a neutral person. He does, he has a very specific code.
Mom, let me like him.
No, he's bad. But he looks so cool.
Yes, he does. Yeah,
he does. In fiction, like, there's something that's so compelling about the person that has their own personal code of honor. And I think that is something that I've always been drawn to Jango and Boba as characters, that they both sort of have that. And I think Boba seems to have inherited that from his father. And in rereading the comics and stuff that's canon, there's like literally like one canon Jango comic now, which is the Age of Republic Jango comic. It's a one-shot by Jody Houser, and it's really interesting because it retreads a little bit of like how Count Dooku recruited Jango for the cloning program. It's very different than the Legends one, but really they have the conversation where he requests a clone son to continue his legacy, which in the Legends canon, he was a little bit more like, it's for my mentor, which I thought was kind of weird. But I just love, there's this one moment where he looks down at the clones, and like Lama Su, or it might be Tanwi, I don't know, says like, you must be proud. And he says, what do I have to be proud of? Livestock bread is cannon fodder. And I was like, that's such an interesting idea,
Yeah.
Because it's, for him, there's no personal connection to accomplishment in the clones. It is taken from him, and he is a specimen, but, a specimen, he's agile, he's, smart, he's skilled. But there's
he's
nothing
the template, right? Yeah,
exactly. He's a template. A template is a starting point. He hasn't done anything. And so I get this feeling from him. He says to Boba later in that we aren't born with our reputations. We have to earn them. And I feel like he kind of sees his son as his, for good or ill, his personal project to leave a lasting mark on the galaxy that is a mirror of him in some way. But I find that Boba has carried on with this personal code of honor very interesting, because even at the end of that comic, he chooses not to kill someone. And oftentimes in the Clone Wars, when he shows up, he chooses not to kill. And that's like his defining trait as a child. Even though he's deadly and skilled, he routinely goes against the wishes of his fellow bounty hunters and Aurra Sing and these other people, and lets people live, which I think is really cool.
And people definitely try to use him because he has a way about him in the Clone Wars, like Aurra and the other bounty hunters that are kind of associated with him. But he definitely has his own, like you said, code of honor and sort of code that he is going about in the galaxy with. And I think that some of my favorite interactions are like with him and Ventress.
Yes.
It kind of is no wonder he turned out the way he did in the Age of Rebellion, because like, that is his life, even though he had like such an interesting and interested father who, wanted to do what was best for him. But oh boy.
Well, I do think there's such that's definitely props to Tamara Morrison and Daniel Logan. In Attack of the Clones, because they share such a brief amount of screen time together, but they do have a connection. There's chemistry there. I do feel like I saw myself in Jango Boba relationship. That's also because I'm Samoan. The Polynesian aspect was very important for me, representation wise, which made it hurt even more when Jango was decapitated by my least favorite Jedi, Mace Windu. But what struck me in rewatching the Clone Wars episodes and just thinking about how I thought about Boba is I feel like he's a deeply hurt, aimless person, forever in search of this sort of like parental figure to substitute for the one that was taken from him in such a like deeply traumatic way. Yeah. And I do feel like I think it's different for him because he has this personal sense of honor. I was thinking about Darth Maul in a lot of ways, or I guess Maul, as we call him now.
Yeah.
And I thought that in a way, like Maul becomes such a punching bag, but oftentimes I feel like that's usually Maul's fault. He's almost like masochistic in certain ways, whereas Boba becomes a punching bag for the universe because of his code, which you could say is his fault, but it's usually other people failing him, not him failing other people.
Well, so Maul himself sees all of the angles, but can't avoid the fact that like
truly a
several
Sisyphean
Sisyphean
loser,
figure, right? Like he has brought much of this on himself.
Definitely.
Like Sisyphus, which is trying to deny the fates and the gods doing what he thinks is right for him.
Fighting gravity.
Exactly. Yeah. Fighting gravity is a good way to put it. Whereas Boba himself is like one of those few figures that, like me, myself, I did not like Boba Fett growing up. And I'm a brand new Boba convert.
Welcome.
So yes. Also, anything with Fennec in it has made it that much more.
She rules.
Much more interesting, and we can go into some speculation about what we hope to see in the future, I think, which would be really cool at the end. But he himself is just like trying to do, at least whenever we see him, trying to do what his dad was doing, right? Just trying to make his way in the galaxy. And like the problem is that just trying to make your way without any sort of purpose, it's very aimless. And so, like, what are you doing these things for? Well, I'm doing them for money. Well, what is the money for? Well, and it just ends up kind of becoming this endless cycle of like, are you just trying to get by?
Well, that's what I appreciated about, it's what I've always wanted for the character if he did come back, is hopefully seeing a Boba that's developed or changed in some way, because I feel like even though I love the character, I feel like I've developed, as I've grown older, a healthy distance, or at least perspective on him, where I feel like, not to disparage any writing or any creators having worked on Boba, but oftentimes I feel like you run the risk of having a character that is just a stony kind of killer badass that, has these cutting one-liners and murders people, and that's it. And there's nothing really there for me. And, I know that he's around solely because of the amazing Joe Johnston design and how iconic he looked with, like, in all the stuff. But there's so much more, I think, so much more potential in that character, given his background that they gave to him in Attack of the Clones and stuff like that. And so I feel like, even if in the Clone Wars, the little tags that show up in his episodes are so interesting, because you have like, in Death Trap, it's like, who my father was matters less than my memory of him, which is all about trying to honor legacy. You know what I mean? It's like what his father stood for. He was this feared bounty hunter in the galaxy. And I imagine his death is, embarrassing, or at least hurtful to Boba in the way it affected that legacy. And then later on, it says like revenge in Lethal Trackdowns, revenge is a confession of pain. And like, it's even worse that we have Mace Windu, who has, so when I was watching these and just rethinking about like the Mace Windu, because people are saying, is Mace Windu going to come back in Boba Fett and all this? I really hope not, because I feel like part of what I think we don't necessarily deal with a lot in Western media is the idea that revenge is a costly pursuit. I love like Korean film. If you watch a lot of Korean film,
yes,
my favorite thing about revenge drama is like the point of those movies is don't do it.
Yeah, it's always that. Yeah, it's always
self-destructive. It's the worst. Don't do it. And I feel like the idea that Mace Windu died at someone else's hand, he is unreachable. It's this open wound that will never be healed, and it's something that you need to move past rather than reconcile by murder or whatever.
I mean, I think it could be reconciled through healing and forgiveness.
Through healing, yeah,
right?
Forgiveness.
Yeah,
exactly.
So like if that was the story that they were planning on telling, I would be all for it. But
I don't think it's going to be.
No, I know. I don't know. I just don't. Well, it could be.
Maybe.
I
don't know. He did just straight up murder someone, and the Tatooine postscript Bib Fortuna thing. I mean, obviously, it's a Boba Fett show. It's my dream come true. Like, I'm going to watch it. I'm going to watch it multiple times. I'm really excited. But similar to, Rey going back to Tatooine, I do wonder, him going back to this place of pain is a very interesting idea for me.
Did you notice that the
Macquarie font?
Yeah, that's
It said his name, which is interesting. Which I don't know.
Name. Yeah.
I don't know if that was like just a fun kind of ad they had, or they're implying that he was there before. Or...
They wouldn't have done the prop work if that wasn't his seat before.
True. I do wonder though, we can talk about more hopes for the future later, but there's so many ways you could take that character, and I just hope they take the more sort of reflective, kind of probing, path forward, because like, are they going to do flashbacks? Are they going to explore this sort of thing? Because one of my things I thought was interesting with this season of Mandalorian is you never had a scene where Din spoke with Boba about what the armor meant to him, because thematically I thought it was so interesting, and it was set up in a very nice way. I'm not sure if it resolved. Maybe it will resolve next season. But you have Cobb Vanth, a man who wears the armor but is not a Mandalorian. You have he meets Bo-Katan next. She's like the most Mandalorian, ancestral, whatever. She used to rule Mandalore. Blah 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 blah. Who cares? But no, I'm joking. And then you have Boba, a person who is, very unique relationship to the armor, doesn't have to wear the mask, all that stuff. And then Din, who's a, child of the Watch or whatever. And I just wish all those people had like one dialogue scene where they kind of got, dig into the nitty gritty of their path, their thought process behind like what it meant to them. Especially Boba, who's called out and almost delegitimized repeatedly. His humanity is always in question to the people he comes in contact with, which is something that's always frustrating to me.
Is so that he is considered to be less than because he was a clone, right? And I think that's just like another interesting way to treat the subject of what it truly takes to be a Mandalorian or a member of society, right? Like,
no, definitely.
There's a way that they're exploring that with, because we know Yoda views all the clones as unique souls, right?
Yeah. Allegedly.
But he still had no problem with using them as what Jango would refer to them as cannon fodder, right?
Fodder. Yeah, which is... Yeah. I think that's one of the interesting things I've thought about, thinking about Obi-Wan, who is, I think one of the best Jedi. I think Qui-Gon's my favorite, but Obi-Wan, the way he's characterized in those movies and in the Clone Wars series, Obi-Wan, he's a ride or die with Anakin person, but he is quick to just leave other people behind for the mission. Padme famously falls onto the sand dune and he's like, leave her, Anakin, we're fine. She's going to be okay. Who knows what's going to happen? But I think like, it's just interesting the way different people view the humanity of the clones, because someone like Ahsoka, whose defining characteristic, I think, is her compassion, is very close to the Rex, and you can see why. But then you have different levels of that where like Obi-Wan knows Rex. He's fond of Cody, but I don't think Obi-Wan would have a problem if Cody, had to be given up for the sake of the mission or for, the Jedi Order or whatever, and especially someone like Mace, who's just like... To
add on to that, whereas like Rex himself has been almost enhanced by Anakin's loyalty and that's reflected back in what he gives to others. And like him, Ahsoka and Anakin... Rex, Ahsoka, and Anakin all being very loyal to each other and caring about each other produces somebody in Rex that gives that onto Ezra. Like he gives that understanding onto Ezra. It's like Ahsoka and Rex gave Ezra like all of the love that Anakin had ever given them, because that's what Anakin fundamentally was love. But the problem is that love and hate are very, very, very closely related.
True. Well, it's really chilling to think about that relationship with them and how it, with the Jedi, and how it enriched Rex, and how like these other clones that we get to know, Fives, Echo, and all these people, they're enriched by these relationships that they have. But that means every single clone had the potential for this development, even if they had this accelerated life cycle. And I think it's very reflective of how the Republic and how the Jedi view, a group like the Bad Batch, who are like aberrant, and they're these outliers, and they're outliers because they have personality and these quirks, but also the same people are quick to use those, weaponize those quirks in a way that will serve them. And I think that's just very interesting and sad, because I think Jango, for all his, he's not a great guy, but I think he has a very clear-eyed view of the universe coming from a place of hardship and toil,
Yeah.
Which is confirmed in so what I was saying to you before we started recording is that the the Concord Dawn, or in the beginning, the Concord Dawn Jaster Mayriel stuff, that was in Legends, but we didn't know, we didn't have any confirmation of where Jango was from. And that learning that he was a foundling is so interesting.
Yeah.
And I think if they delve into that, and whether in a new book or comics or whatever, it will help develop a character I think is already very like rich in potential, because he is a person, connecting to my Jedi point from earlier. I think what bothers me is there's always this inherent presumed assumed moral superiority in all the Jedi to different extents, but especially in people like Mace Windu. And when Anakin is arguing about like revenge against Boba for trying to assassinate Mace Windu's just like, do you think I should be like this child? Basically saying like, should I be taken up by this anger and all this stuff? But Mace and all the Jedi are coming from a place of hypocrisy, like Luke says in The Last Jedi. Mm-hmm. They are the arbiters, they are the judges, and often the executioners, living, even though if they're living these very simple lifestyles, it's still living in a place of finery, and they don't want for anything. Their temple is amazing. They walk around with this almost like total authority. Whereas Jango, someone that we now know was born on Concord Dawn, is raised by Jaster Mayriel. We don't know if it has the same tragic backstory. I'm assuming he does.
Yeah.
Came from nothing and had to work up in his world to have this reputation that caused Count Dooku to seek him out. And then Boba watches his father die and then has to live up to this legacy that his father made, starting from, once again, nothing. And we see how hard that is, even though we only get him in like 5 or 6 episodes of Clone Wars.
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry to ramble. I'm very passionate about my dislike of Mace Windu.
Well, no, and it's the whole institution in and of itself, and it's like, yeah, we catch the Republic and we catch the Jedi at the point that the whole tower is crumbling,
it's teetering, yeah,
right, and the fact that all of the dogma and all of the ego has built layered upon itself, and that's why like seeing Yoda like out there on Dagobah like with nothing. Mm-hmm. Is actually very refreshing at that point, like now when we view the whole story, because Definitely. It's like, yes, I had to give up everything to finally understand what being a Jedi is all about. It's about service to the universe, yes. Right? It kind of sucks though for everybody involved, because there was no middle ground for anybody. True. Right? Yeah, for Jango though, like this is always kind of like a institutionalized poverty, institutionalized racism, all of these things. Like, can you ever really blame somebody who's like, I made my way, I survived?
Yeah. I mean, it's in a very, very tough universe. And I think I was struck by even someone that I love so much as Plo Koon, who is my favorite Jedi. And I thought for a long time, I still think he survived the getting shot down in Revenge of the Sith. Bring back Plo Koon. But I think I think they developed him so well in the Clone Wars. And even someone as level-headed and thoughtful as him, I think shows some of that Jedi superiority when he and Ahsoka are kind of investigating the whole Jango situation. They go down to, the underlevels of Coruscant, saying like, this is where Jango frequented, be careful. This is a bad place. And it kind of has that sort of real world application of like a policing force that is not of the community that it's policing. Yeah. And I think that the Jedi are largely that for everywhere. What is their jurisdiction? It's everywhere. It's not just Coruscant. They can go wherever. It's the universe. they're almost acting unilaterally all the time. And sometimes it takes, I don't know if Star Wars ever truly grapples with that, but sometimes, they make these decisions just out of the blue, and Anakin makes them, and so he survives by the skin of his teeth, and there's tons of collateral damage, and you're thinking like, is there any sort of consequence for these things that happen, or are they just above it?
I mean, the consequence ends up being that people blame the Jedi for the war. Like that ends up it ends up destroying the Jedi in and of itself, right? True. Well,
I would love to have more of that. I know it's in a lot of the new canon books or the the comics, but like there's that one shot or it's like 2 seconds in either The Phantom Apprentice or one of the new like Clone Wars season 7 episodes where like people are cheering as the is it like the Jedi or as the the Maul Mandalorians are like taking people away. And I was like, I feel like I would love to get more Star Wars from the perspective of people on the ground, people who don't know the Jedi, people who don't like the Jedi, because we usually get that, but from like criminals or bounty hunters or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know. It'd be cool just to have just like an anthology series where you get to live with someone for like a day, you know?
Yeah. Well, we got a little bit of that in the Clone Wars, like near the end when like
True.
people like bombed the Jedi Temple, and it's like, why? Oh, people hate the Jedi?
Yeah.
Oh, who? What? No, say it isn't so. But this kind of ties into this whole complex relationship that Jango, because of being recruited by a former Jedi in Dooku, and then all of his clones end up becoming the tools of the Jedi and the Republic. And of course, in the end, Sidious, of course, because it was all his plan.
True.
But it's a complex relationship because the Jedi were tricked into becoming the generals to leading this army. They didn't try to find a peaceful solution. They didn't try to negotiate. They just ended up taking on the mantle that they were laid with and didn't try to find a way out of it, and just said, yes, this is our job. Yes. And even though the droids themselves, and I will always argue that droids themselves are sentient and
droids
feel
have feelings.
pain and all of that. So it's not like this was a sum-zero war, right? That ended up happening in the Clone Wars. The Clone Wars were horrific, not only for the people that were involved, but also like who ended up dying, the droids and clones alike, but also for the worlds that it ended up affecting. And
definitely, it's
like all of that is on the galaxy. And that was Sidious's point. Like he wanted to create the universe so out of balance and so raking up like the sins of the war that it was easier for him to gain power and control and all of that. And also the chaos itself helped him.
Well, I find something so interesting about I would love to learn more about the clones as they aged into this middle period between Age of Republic and Age of Rebellion, because I think it's almost a mirror of, the dehumanization of Boba, in the sense that you have these people that are your heroes. And I'm wondering if there's an interesting narrative way we'll see of how these people that were your heroes, we see Commander Cody turn on Kenobi, or Obi-Wan Kenobi, because he's, Order 66 triggers his mind and all that stuff. But there's an inherent dehumanization in that those people that were your friends then become the blueprint for the stormtroopers, who are never humanized in any of the future stuff. And the one time they are humanized recently in the Rick Famuyiwa episode, or chapter 15 of The Mandalorian, then they're promptly killed once again right after that. So it's so interesting that, we have these little threads of humanity that we pull on, of good guys, bad guys, don't join and all this stuff, or all this stuff. But then we never quite get there. And following someone like Ray Sloan from the books, or someone who believes so fully in the Order sort of thing. Because Valen Hess, he, whatever he's saying, even if you agreed with it, he's a creepy guy. He's being creepy and weird. And he's, I think there's an inherent perspective in that conversation where it's an ideological perspective, but he's the villain. You don't have a situation in which there are two characters speaking from equal power with equal conviction that's presented in a neutral manner, because we're always coming from one side, aren't we?
Yeah, I mean, there is Lost Stars, which...
True. I just want to see it on screen,
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, I think that, there is a complexity to humanizing the stormtroopers, which is what we found with Finn. As soon as we have a stormtrooper humanized, right? Past the clone troopers, because the clone troopers were always humanized, right? So to see them become villains in Revenge of the Sith because of Order 66 is very difficult in and of itself. But then to have somebody break free of that programming with Finn is it begs the question is why can't anyone else? Right.
Yes.
So
and that's such an interesting narrative or thematic question that's presented with his friend, the bloody hand on the stormtrooper helmet, which is so visually interesting. Yeah. But then Finn, by the end of the movie, is straight up murdering, straight up killing all sorts of stormtroopers. So it's like, I wish we just like pick away at that thread just a little bit more of like, what does it mean? Like everybody in Star Wars, and I know it's supposed to be an adventure. I know it's supposed to be like fun and stuff. Luke Skywalker is a farm boy, starts killing people, no reaction. Princess Leia, we're introduced to her. She murders someone, no reaction. Rey has a comedic moment when she's shooting the blaster or she's trying to get it to work and then kills a stormtrooper. And it's like, oh, wow. But nobody takes a second to look and be like, oh my God, like I just killed someone. You know what I mean? It's always like a triumphant moment. And I feel like maybe it's getting into too much of a dramatic thing for a Star Wars film or series. But like now that we have this diversity of content, like why not go there? Because it would be really interesting, I think, to get into the mindset of someone who has done that.
I think that it just, and this is something I've been thinking about a lot recently with like droids, like the Dark Troopers in the last episode. I'm like, these droids had feelings. You might not have been able to communicate with them because they speak some sort of droidy language, but they understood that they were no longer going to exist.
Well, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just meant I've had that question since we saw the trash can droid upside down in Return of the Jedi getting his feet burned. Yeah, or getting their feet burned.
Like that's that. Droids feel pain. Droids are sentient. Even Gonk droids, which is the droid that is being tortured in Jabba's palace in that episode. And so, like, the problem is that all of these added layers of story end up adding complexity to the resolution. And so if you're coming along for the ride and you know enough about Star Wars, and you've asked yourself these moral questions with regards to the themes of Star Wars, and sometimes they're answered, right? Like with Finn, like choosing to be different, choosing to put down the question. It's like, well, what is the next step from that? Because that's the story that we want to know next, because we've already seen a stormtrooper walk away. And a stormtrooper walking away is still the legacy of Jango Fett.
Exactly, yeah.
Right?
Well, that's why I'm interested to see with like, I love Boba Fett, the bounty hunter. But my interest in the Boba Fett show coming up is I almost find it more thematically rich to be like, what am I beyond what my father set me out to be? What am I as my own person, not defined by this very particular skill set or profession that I was trained up in? Like, who is Boba Fett now after having survived the Sarlacc? And how is he defined? How does he define himself? And not that I would disagree with it, but if he ends up being some sort of kingpin, I personally would want something more, I think, more character driven, because the Boba we got a glimpse of in the Robert Rodriguez episode and the tragedy and moving on from that, he seems like a very different character than the one that we left before, even though we got so little. But something I told my mom, my poor beleaguered mom, I have to shout out to her, because I just picture myself just talking like for hours and hours when I was younger. Like, yeah, whatever. But I was watching Empire Strikes Back, like you do, recently, and just thought about that sort of inherent honor or sort of like moral code and how weird that is and how idiosyncratic it is. Because what does Boba say when he's telling them to put the Carbonite Han Solo into his ship? Put Captain Solo in the cargo hold, which makes me feel like he's still giving respect to this man. There's something so specific about that moment that's so strange, I think. It's not like put it in the cargo hold, not put Solo in the cargo hold. You know what I mean? Like,
he used his official title. That is really interesting.
Seems very much like a business transaction, like the meaning of like, it's not personal. You know what I mean? And even when he's at Jabba's palace, he's on retainer. So it's like, I just find him such an interesting character, and I really want someone to just dig into that meaty potential that he has, because he's so specific.
I wonder if they're going to go kind of more Godfather-esque in it, like where there's like the difference between family and business, Yeah. Like, and what does Boba consider to be family nowadays? I don't know. It's When I heard the rumors that he was coming back, I think I tweeted something like, you think that Boba coming back won't mean that he didn't have a rebirth in the womb,
in the belly of the beast?
Yeah, in the womb-like Sarlacc pit, which is a woman or a feminine creature out there that lives for forever, which is basically like a goddess figure that he has died and been reborn in through death and rebirth. Like you think he's just going to be the same. That's not even possible from a story element perspective. They wouldn't just bring him back for no reason. And then we actually see the teaser of him at the end of that episode when, Cobb's armor is finally taken away. And it's like, had he given up his armor? Like, had he just not cared because the community needed the armor?
Yeah. There's that 5 year, it was like 5 year gap or something.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. Just let Cobb Vanth have his armor. So I'm wondering how they're going to explain that. And also, I mean, shout out to Tamora Morrison, or Tamara.
Yeah, absolutely.
Everything I see of this man, I mean, I always loved him, but like, he just seems like the coolest guy. He is a great actor. And I think he has that such a, I think a lot of actors are good, but some people just have the spark, he has that inherent actorly quality where he sounds like, or isn't that something calling the Stifling Suite or whatever. And it sounds amazing, even though it's ridiculous, and even him turning around in that first episode, there's just like a feeling, a grandeur to him,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I want him to play all of the clones.
Oh, I know. And, I mentioned it in my original Boba thing. Like, I know that D. Bradley Baker did a good job and stuff, but like, it'd be wonderful to have a Polynesian actor portraying, a Polynesian originated character and everything. And I hope there are these rumors that, Commander Cody is leading. It's just a rumor that Commander Cody is leading like a Jedi hunting group in the Kenobi show. And I was like, well, I hope Tamora Morrison gets every single, job that he can from this. I love that guy. And he deserves it. He seems he's a neat guy. Check out Once for Warriors if you haven't seen it. Everyone out there.
I do think that, like, to your point about what are the clones experiencing after Order 66, I think that might be the point of the Bad Batch show. Yeah.
It definitely seems that way with the burning away of the logo for the Clone Wars in the end.
Yeah. Because like these are also aspects of Jango too, right?
I know. Well, it's interesting too with like Fennec, she seems to have, gone through almost a literal rebirth given what happened to her, at the end of the Gunslinger chapter 5. Is it chapter 5? I think so. I think so.
Yes.
Before Sanctuary 5.
Yeah.
Why do I know these things? But I think it's interesting to see her turn and how she's changed. And I love, on a sort of meta note, having these kind of very mature actors as the centerpiece of it. People of color, almost 60. Tamora Morrison just had his birthday. 60-year-old and like a 58-year-old woman.
Yep.
Asian woman being the centerpiece of a TV show, a multi-million-dollar, like enormous franchise thing. It's so amazing. I'm so excited. And Robert Rodriguez is, executive producing. Like, let's get some more people of color in there.
Yeah, and what I'm excited to see is if they're planning, because we know she's going to be briefly, at least they have one shot of her in the trailer for the Bad Batch. What I would love to see is actually that they have a history together from Boba being young and her being young, and then them like his decision to save her was based on something from the past. That would be
interesting.
Done for.
Well, I think it's so interesting because I know that they were going to do it in the unproduced Clone Wars episodes, but like Boba's story definitely feels unfinished in the Clone Wars. So if they bring him back in some way, it's such a fertile period in terms of like what's happening. There's so much conflict in the galaxy, but they have Fennec. Like, it makes sense that a young Boba, last time we saw him, he was betrayed by Ventress in the case of what was it called? The Deception or something like that.
Yeah.
And I think Fennec showing up and seeing both of them kind of going through this transformation of ruthless to slightly more lived in and not necessarily compassionate, but understanding might be interesting, because they're definitely changed even by the time we reach them in this new season. Because Fennec in episode, in the Gunslinger is very different from the Fennec that comes back, having been one of the wretched of Tatooine, who's saved. God, I would listen to that guy talk all day.
I think that what's really interesting is like now she has purpose. And so it's like, what I want to know is what is Boba's purpose?
Yes.
Now.
God, life debt stuff. Sign me up. Life debt, like, just like friendship. I know this is a Star Wars podcast, but I've been recently rewatching Lord of the Rings, and I think Star Wars at its best functions from a place of complete earnestness. Mm-hmm. And I think same thing with Lord of the Rings. And I think it's like superpower is like the strength of friendship. And I know that sometimes they shoot for it, and sometimes a lot of people feel they don't necessarily make it. But like when you have friends being friends, doing things together and like failing and then succeeding and supporting one another, it's like the best thing. And I want that so badly for this formerly kind of one note killer, boring, badass character. Like I want him to feel, seeing Din cry is a good thing. Seeing people emote is a good thing. I want Boba to like be, he has those edges of humor, but I want that warmth. I want him to feel something,
Yeah.
The main unanswered question, which they kind of just, push aside for the other thing that happens in the finale, is with the Bo-Katan resolution. Like that's just like a hanging thread. I imagine that seems like a large conflict that would happen in the next season, and I'm wondering how Boba fits into that, because I think at least what I've been pleased to see is like I feel like Boba and Din are just on this different level, being like, hey, we're pals now, I guess, like he supports him, and I think he sees in his care for the child Grogu a little bit of his his father's care for him as a child. Or at least that's how I felt when I saw Boba looking at him picking through the ashes of the Razor Crest.
Yeah.
In a very sad, despondent way. Picking up the ball, which was very similar to his father's helmet. Head may or may not be still inside, but still representative of a relationship between two people,
Exactly.
And I don't know. I'm very excited for that. And I think that I don't know if they'll get into more Jedi stuff, because Jedi are, for the most part, dead. But I do think there's still some more stuff to be said if they get into him in the Bad Batch or get into him in flashbacks or something. Because like I'm just looking over my notes, and just like even someone like I said, I enjoyed like Plo Koon when he is talking to Plo Koon. Boba's talking to Plo Koon after attempting to kill Mace Windu. He says, "I'm not a murderer. I just want justice." And Plo Koon replies, "We are justice." It's like, come on, Plo Koon.
Plo Koon.
And then when he meets, he's captured at the end, and he talks to Mace Windu, and he says, "I'll never forgive you." And he says, "You're gonna have to." And it's like, so for all these Jedi tenets, Mace Windu could have easily said, "I'm sorry about your father." But you know what I mean? Like at every point, there's this assumed moral surety. They feel like they cannot have, even the deepest sin of the Jedi being like, it's impossible. There's no way we could have been infiltrated so deeply by the Sith. It just it makes me laugh.
Well, I think that's where, to me, why tell a Boba story, right? Well, it's to tell us how he becomes like who he is meant to be, because he's kind of like
actualization.
Much like Vader, he's kind of stuck over almost when he's sealed in his own armor. He's kind of stuck. So like it's like, what do you tell? Well, he takes off the helmet. He is doing his own choices. He is seeking something. And that is exciting in and of itself, because my hope is that he returns to Din with, able to be a mentor and to be a person that has seen more and understood more with his own journey.
Yeah, I just want that conversation. And I think the idea that he put on the armor and then immediately took it off again, I thought was so meaningful in the scope of the episode of the tragedy, because he lands and we have the whole action scene. He is the Boba we always wanted and all this stuff. But then he immediately not regresses, but I think progresses. He takes it off, and instead of kind of harkening back to this stony, silent sort of killer, immediately shows Din, he knows that this is of value to Din, and immediately acquiesces to Din's requests, saying, "This is who I am. This is, I'm proud of this. This is my father's armor. This is my chain code. It is mine." You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, for whatever reason, even though he's already going to be sworn to him because of Grogu, he needs to, he validates himself in the eyes of Din, but also, it's a moment for him finally having reclaimed this thing that's been, I don't know, either it's elusive or he thought he wasn't worthy of it for some time, or, I maybe we'll learn about
or somebody else needed it.
Or somebody else needed it, which I think is the most interesting point, is like he was doing his own spiritual journey in the desert. Like, who am I? What am I doing? I'm reborn. And I think, so much for Din of the show is like gathering allies, but I also think this is a very interesting thing that could happen for Boba. He has Fennec, of course, but like, how did he survive? Are we going to get that? I imagine so. And, in the KW Jeter books, we had Dengar is the one that found him. I would love some more Dengar content, because I'm a big fan of Dengar. And I just think this sort of breaking down of barriers, because when we leave Boba, he falls in the Sarlacc, he's still this very, very serious kind of taciturn person, and be literally stripped of these layers of ego and, this projection of who he thinks he needs to be in relation to his memory of his father and all that stuff. And then literally exiting with nothing, I think is so interesting. And like, especially maybe stripped of the armor, because the Jawas find it and whatever, just this, having to re-explore, re-examine yourself and like find who you are is something I really hope they continue with in the new show. And we'll see if it happens, but I really, that's my deepest hope, is to know who this person is.
One of the things, like visually, that him still wearing the black underneath the armor made him look almost like a mosaic in some ways, like with the pieces of the armor over top of like the black, because before he had that like lighter blue or gray.
It has like flight jumpsuit.
Yeah,
sort of thing.
His jumpsuit underneath. And like now it looks like he's more, I don't know, like pieced together. And it looks like he's kind of finding himself in these activities and these actions. And like, honestly, I'm very excited to see struggle. I'm excited to see emotionality. I really hope that Rodriguez can pull those things out of the character and take us on like a really interesting journey with him.
Well, I think a strength of him as a filmmaker, once again, I think, like I said earlier, is the strength of Star Wars, is he's a very earnest filmmaker, and he approaches these things that are ludicrous on the surface, like the Spy Kids movies, but approaches them with like a freewheeling sort of enthusiasm that's very like childlike, but also respectful of storytelling. Like he's telling stories there, and I think at his best, he is definitely capable of that. So I really hope he indulges in that in the show and has something that's more toward that rather than just, Boba killing a bunch of people to look cool or something.
Yeah. Like even though he killed Bib Fortuna, who was sitting in his chair as he walked back into Jabba's palace, I still have a lot of like interest in the character because of him sitting in the throne and Fennec sitting on the side, and like this was not what maybe Jabba's palace, or now his palace, had been previously.
Yes. Well, that's the thing. I wonder if I'm reading too much into it, but Fennec frees that slave Twi'lek, which is something that I also wrote an article for About the Force about aliens and exploring the other, and it did kind of, it bummed me out that we had another. I know it's supposed to be harkening back to the Return of the Jedi, but like once again, the Twi'leks are either, gluttonous monsters and slavers, or sexualized slaves, which is unfortunate. We could have had like a Max Rebo person, and any sort of alien could have been there, or any sort of person. But that when Fennec freed her, I don't know if that's just a momentary thing or a preview of what's to come. Because like my dream headcanon is Boba Fett comes, he's reborn, he's wearing his armor, but also in this weird sort of monkish robe. He has this awesome sort of like will they won't they romance with Fennec Shan.
They will. And they must.
They go around disassembling Black Sun, all these cartels, the Hutt clan, Shell Hutts, get all the crazy EU stuff in there, Crimson Dawn, and basically make Tatooine like, if Greek Karga and Cara Dune, two people can clean up all of Navarro, make a show about them cleaning up Tatooine.
I'm trying to think about what is the story that's there, and I'm
so interested because I could totally see me being way off base, and we come back and it's just like an adventure of the week sort of thing, and obviously I'll watch that because I love Boba Fett, but it would be nice, given the structure of Mandalorian, which is taken still, I love the show, but it's still taking me a while to get used to. I wouldn't mind at this point having like a very cohesive, full, not serialized story, or serialized story. A story that is cohesive
Continuous.
as like continuous. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because I'm thrown off by the Mandalorian still of like, what was this one, you know?
Yeah, the episodic serialized nature of this show, right? But even serials, like you watch Flash Gordon, we're continuous story.
There's a through line, a dramatic through line, a character arc and stuff that's, you know, being serviced. And I get that. And that happens too in The Mandalorian. But sometimes I think I just need to remind myself it's not how I'm used to intaking Star Wars, you know? And given that they're kind of going for this diversity of new content, and some of which I would hope would be shooting to be like a prestige drama, like let's just have like this 8-hour, you know, very tight crime redemption story. Like I would love that, you know?
Yeah, I almost think like he's trying to be the black hole of the crime syndicates and become like the Godfather. Like, if you're going to operate under my rules, and my rules are going to become the rule of law. I think that's what they're going to do.
Well, even Tamara Morrison on the thing, he was like, he's the kingpin, you know?
Yeah.
He's the kingpin of the galaxy.
Yeah, like I definitely think that they're going to go in that direction where he's like, I'm in charge. I'm the biggest bad around, and thus certain things can't happen because I don't agree with them. Yeah.
Well, a question I was thinking too, you know, preparing for this this conversation was like, given the sort of meta development of different clans, I wonder if we're going to get more Mandalorian history. Not so much maybe of the other ones like Ren and Kryze or whatever, but maybe we'll get more Kryze with the Mandalorian. But like, his father is a foundling of the Fett clan. I would love to get more of the Fett stuff because, you know, personally, since I'm Samoan, that's what always drew me to the character when I was younger, was seeing this little kid that looked very much like a younger version of me and his father, you know, driving around the galaxy, doing all this stuff. And I would love if they took the inspiration for the Fett clan from Polynesian people, because, you know, we already have his gaffy stick, which is very reminiscent, as they talked about, of the Maori War Club, which I believe is Taika or Tohea, because a lot of people said it was Tokia, which is kind of a Fijian. I mean, all of they're all from like Southeast Asian, you know, Micronesian, sort of the same Polynesian base. But I just think there's a real opportunity to explore something that's not explored in, you know, large franchise fiction. Because we usually get, you know, you think about these things that come out, these genres, cyberpunk usually has like a more East Asian inspiration, or these other things are very westernized or whatever. But Polynesian culture is such an untapped resource for science fiction and fantasy as a inspiration, you know? And I'd love just to have this whole clan, just make it Polynesian, just draw from Polynesian culture. It'd be so cool. I'd really enjoy that.
What would you like to see brought out from a Polynesian culture perspective?
Well, I would say, first of all, where's the Mandoa? I feel like Mandoa sounds very much like, you know, very vowel-centric, very like Samoan or any sort of the Polynesian languages have this sort of mellifluous, very like vowel-centric sound. So I'd love some Mandoa, the Mandalorian language. I would also love, you know, not necessarily tattoos, but the Polynesian tattooing is very important to the Polynesian culture. And I think like the Samoan Pe'a, which is from the, like, basically above your knees all the way to your waist.
Yep.
Is like a sign of like maturing into like manhood. And then I think you can use.
Well, we've never seen Boba with his armor off, so
this is true. But I do think you could have designs or some sort of
more reason for him and Fennec to get it on.
Oh, we're gonna have a TVMA Star Wars coming up, but just having that iconography, you know, that sort of tattooing, you know, tatau or whatever, is a form of storytelling. And I just imagine, you know, when you start coming out with the title, obviously is using the title logo font or whatever, is using his colors and stuff. But like, if I imagine the iconography of the show having that very sort of Polynesian tatau design would be really, really neat. And I think that sort of like hierarchical clan stuff would be really neat to explore. And obviously, I don't know if this is the best place to do it because you're very focused on one person and he's kind of separated from it. But if they go forward, whether it's in, the books or the comics, I would love that. Or, there's still fertile ground. It could
still be explored as they start to, because I mean, I definitely think that what they're going to do is start to pull all the Mandalorians together to try and take back Mandalore. Like, they could talk about how the different clans themselves have the different ways of managing themselves.
Yes.
And what that all means to the whole.
Well, what defines them and how they're different and how they interact with one another, I find so interesting. Because, like, for whatever reason, the Vizslas are always stirring up trouble. But the way the Kreeses and the Vizslas, they seem very much of a piece to me. They always seem very, like, similar. Whereas I feel like the cultural inspirations for the Wrens and the Fetts seem very specific. Obviously, I'm just extrapolating the Fetts from the two that we know.
Yeah.
But I just think, I mean, obviously, from a selfish standpoint, I just want to see, like, the Kristen Alsman and all these concept artists do a bunch of, like, Polynesian Star Wars stuff. I think it'd be amazing. But yeah, I don't know. I just think Star Wars it has all these influences from Eastern, like Japanese cinema with the samurai stuff and all that stuff, but very,
like,
very
Buddhism
infrequent.
And like Buddhism, especially from from a religious perspective.
True, very true. But very rarely does it indulge in that form of storytelling.
Yeah.
Because I feel like so much of Western storytelling, as we've seen with stuff like The Last Jedi and other, non-Star Wars related stuff, people seem more interested in resolution and more tidy storytelling. Whereas I feel like in a lot of, mythology of Eastern mythology and stuff like that, and even like what we talked about earlier with Korean cinema, a lot of stuff is open to interpretation. There's a lot of ambiguity. There's a lot of self-searching that doesn't necessarily lead to an easy answer. Yeah. And I would love to pull some of that into the storytelling of, being a person is a complex thing. Being alive is difficult and weird. And, put that onto Boba Fett, put that onto these people and see how that affects their personhood, their relationship to their clan. This is probably getting into Sabine and her family and all that stuff, which we only touched on in Rebels. Like, I would love to get a wider spread, and I'd love to cover that in my, Jedi versus the Mandalorian Wars trilogy that I would love to pitch eventually.
I mean,
but, we'll get there.
They must be thinking about it because they constantly bringing up the past.
That, and especially the New Republic Alderaan thing. They've mentioned Alderaan all over this second season. So I was like, they're definitely going to tie into that. But
yes.
But yeah, the Mandalorian Jedi Wars I find so interesting because it's this weird joining of cultures with the Darksaber and, the Mandalore and all that. And it does seem interesting. I mean, this is getting onto more of the Mandalorian stuff. I almost hope Din doesn't become the Mandalore because he's so divorced from the culture, unless it's about him coming to understand the culture, Similar to Boba, if Boba having no interest in it, because he's just Boba,
I mean, if they're making an Arthur parallel, Arthur was an orphan. Arthur didn't know anything about his right to rule, and then found that all out.
True.
Right. So I would prefer it not be Din either, just because. Okay, I see what you're doing. Yeah,
I feel like Bo-Katan's been putting in the hours, so
yeah. Oh, definitely. Like, and in some ways, like, I made all of these jokes in the last month. I'm like, like he's got the saber and he keeps on like trying to give it to her, and somebody drew like a cake that the saber's baked in, and it's like now you have to take it.
No.
Like, and she's just like, no, I must earn it, and she keeps on chasing him, like wanting him to fight her, and it's like, well, okay, I just, is that Din's journey? I don't know. They're gonna have to sell me on it because I'm not there yet.
Aside, in relation to that, I do think, and it's also of value in the conversation with Boba and Jango and stuff, and just Mandalorians as a whole, it would do the whole Star Wars live action / animation world a lot of good to, obviously in an organic way, lay out the very specific rules of the general rules of all the clans of Mandalorian culture. Because I feel like a big question right now for fans, people are always coming with their own experience of Star Wars. Some people only experience the prequels, and then the prequels first, or the original trilogy or the sequel trilogy. And now people are kind of getting to that point where there's so much Star Wars content. Once they start taking in more of it, the contradictions in the new canon are starting to come to a head, especially when it comes to Mandalorian culture and how the rules of the Darksaber work. And I think it would do well. You can retcon it in a way where it's interesting, of like, I didn't earn it last time, and that's why I lost it, because Sabine just was like,
yeah,
hey, you have this. But I do think it would do everyone a great service, storytelling wise, to clear it up and be like, these are the rules. This is the reason why she can't. This is the reason why there's conflict, and build that character conflict if you want that,
Oh boy. Okay. Do I rant about
Oh no. Oh no.
No. It's just more okay. So Star Wars.
This all comes from our deep love of Star Wars.
Yeah. Well, Star Wars has historical canon weight to it now. If you have explored Star Wars in one particular direction, you understand things from a particular lens. What I think they're trying to do is that there is no actual rules of being a Mandalorian, and that everybody is Mandalorian as long as they say they are. I think that's the point that they're trying to make. But it's not succeeding, because people who consumed Rebels will obviously be confused about what the actual rules are compared to what they were told from a first-person POV perspective previously. And so it's difficult. I think that how you resolve that is by having a round table and the people at the round table deciding on what the rules are literally in the story.
And have a discussion.
Yeah, you literally have all of the Mandalorians that have been... You have the armorer, you have Din, you have Boba,
the armor has to come back, by the way.
You have a live action Sabine, for freak's sake. I don't, you have all of these people, and they come together and they're like, this is what is building Camelot. That is how they're going to resolve it. There's no other way.
That does seem the most straightforward way. And it was something that I was not troubled by, but like disappointed when the first season had come out, because I mentioned in my article that like I had always so connected myself to Boba and Jango for their Polynesian representation of Tamara Morrison and Daniel Logan, and the sort of invalidating of that for like it being a creed, not a race, because I'm like, I'm proud to be Samoan. And it made me sad that it's like, oh, well, my weapons are my religion. So is it a religion? And it becomes this very woolly, very complicated thing. And I understand like culture is complicated and there are a lot of different parts of culture, but very rarely is a culture self-defining. Like my mom is white and my dad is like 100% Samoan. I'd identify myself as Samoan because I have that within me. You know what I mean? It's different, I think, if you're coming into this thing, which, sometimes is a culture, but also can be a religion, but is also a creed of values, and I think, like you said, this, the self-identification thing is kind of a thorny subject. And I mean, I'll be interested to see how they resolve it, because I can see it being something that will divide, big surprise, will divide Star Wars fans, given how it's been different in Rebels. But then obviously Dave Filoni has been involved in Rebels. So it's like, I'm just very fascinated with how it will sort itself out.
I mean, I think that they're trying to say something about new culture that ends up developing, that people are sometimes born here, sometimes they come here, sometimes we take over people's land here, right? But is everybody, like for my example, Canadian? Yes, right? And so how does that get resolved if you yourself come from a different family background and you come to the location, or you were born here, or you were, always here, or, you took over here? What does that all mean, right?
Something that I thought was interesting was, oftentimes with Polynesian culture, like that movie Once Were Warriors, it's about colonialism, and it's about how, how a group is viewed from an outside, invading force. And I remember, I forget who did it. It was this, and when I was in college, I read this paper by a Maori person, I believe, a doctor, who said it was called Once Were Gardeners, and basically how by affecting this whole like, oh, we encountered a warrior culture. It was minimizing the breadth of experience that these people had. And I think that there's something inherently dramatically interesting with the Mandalorians, so defined by conflict, to think about like what they are beyond that, you know? Mm-hmm. And I think that they're so defined in Star Wars canon by this warfare that we almost really don't know anything about them beyond that. And I think that would go a long way to contextualizing decisions characters make, or at least giving us more meat to the story of like, what is this culture beyond being this sort of like, you know, in the old canon, this sort of mercenary group, you know, mercenary culture of warriors that kind of went around fighting all the time, you know, because it's so defined by conflict. And I understand, you know, a lot of Star Wars is defined by conflict, but like, that's why I find like new Boba interesting, you know, and Bo-Katan, like older Bo-Katan, who's canonically like 60 or something, like, you know, these people have lived through it. She's still fighting this fight, but like, it'd be so interesting to start meeting other Mandalorians who are like, is there anyone who's tired of the fight? Is there anyone who's feels like the culture similar to the Jedi is what led them to this point, you know, of after the night of 1,000 tears or whatever. Yeah. And, you know, claiming you're of a warrior culture, it's often a point of pride, but it is reductive because there's more to life than conflict, you know?
Well, and that's where, like, I hope, and what I loved about Rebels was it brought out all the artistry of the Mandalorian Sabine, culture with Sabine and with also her father, who was an artist, not a warrior.
Yeah, that's cool.
And, you know, that Mandalorians are also, like, creation and death are very thematically tied together in Star Wars, and that they themselves as a culture can be represented as both creators and destroyers is really, really cool. But now this is all tangled with the fact that Jango has and always was a Mandalorian.
Yes.
So where do we go from here, Taylor?
Where do
all
we go?
Of this complexity that we've laid out, like in this discussion, is like, why tell these stories?
Why tell these stories? Well, I think, you know, at its core, I've always found Boba, beyond him eventually being defined by a Polynesian actor and all that stuff, I always found his story so inspiring because he is like the definition of like a focus tested character. Like, he is only around now, or was around earlier, because he looks so cool. He was undeniable. His design was so cool that people wanted more of him. And then they had to decide how to make more of this character. And it's really neat, I think, to see how such a rich, diverse, and enormous fandom has sprung about by this person, and how it continues to grow these different layers and different layers of complexity and nuance. And I really feel like the path forward with Boba, at least in my interpretation, is exploring the idea of identity, because he's so defined in his young life, his early life, by his father's legacy, very similar to Ben Solo, his father's legacy, who his father was, his father's profession, what his father trained him to do. But now, like we said earlier, he has this opportunity to explore who he is beyond that. Is he a bounty hunter, or is he a sort of dangerous force for good? You know, is he a chaotic good? Is he lawful good? He's not lawful good. He's chaotic good, I think. And I think that there's so much he's such a solitary figure beforehand. Now is the time to broaden his horizons and show, you know, the best insights into character are gained from their relationships with other people. And being so solitary, it's so interesting now to see him interact with Fennec. And I really want more from that. If Dengar shows up, you know, that might be cool. It doesn't matter who shows up so long as they engage with him and show us who he was, how he changed, and what it means to be a Mandalorian to him, or for him now, and how that affects his relationship with the memory of his father, his legacy, and moving forward into this new world where Mandalorians are popping up again after, you know, this fallow period of potential genocide.
Oh, my goodness. There is so much to cover. I'm really, really excited to see that. I personally just want to see I want to see the relationship with Fennec and him. That's what I'm most interested in, because again, like what you said, seeing them reflect off of each other, and in some ways I just want him to be like she's the most important thing in his life, just because I think that would be such an interesting dynamic to give to Boba Fett.
Definitely. Well, especially as a challenge to preconceived notions by certain people of who he is.
Yeah. Give
Something
him some massive complexity. I think that would be amazing. And then also, I want the code of honor that he has now developed in his later years to come to the forefront, and like be something that he uses and is challenged on, and then also brings back to Din after his book, basically. Yes.
Well, it does seem like so much of these, since they are tied into this single timeline, probably ending in a very like endgamey sort of crossover event against my best blue boy, Grand Admiral Thrawn. I do think that whatever each of these characters learn, I imagine, has to be an integral part of Din's development later on down the road. And so I'm interested to see how each of these stories bring something to him. Once again, I could be completely wrong, but I'm interested to see how these stories bring that lesson for Ahsoka, for Boba, for these other people coming back to Din as the story moves into its end game. Like, what are those lessons going to be? How is he going to develop?
Yeah, and I don't know that Thrawn is going to be the bad guy.
No, I know. I just love Thrawn so much. He was another person where I'm like, well, he's not really bad. He's Well,
and they've definitely softened him.
Oh, yeah.
From who he was in Legends.
No, definitely. I mean, the Chiss ascendancy is that's a whole different topic, but so interesting as this kind of like very different culture that functions on a very different level. And his idiosyncratic kind of like Hannibal Lecter appreciation of art has always made me so excited. Like I always love that, and especially with Mads Mikkelsen's brother, Lars Mikkelsen, doing the voice in Rebels is so good. So
yeah, exactly. And like the Chiss themselves, like the stories that they're telling, I don't get the impression that he has any desire to be a conqueror.
No. And I think that would be if that choice happened, I'd be very bummed about it.
Yeah.
If anything, I would want a weirdly untapped EU figure, I think, was Prince Xizor. Like, I think that guy should show up. I honestly, when Maul showed up at the end of Solo, I was expecting, to be Prince Xizor, even though I know that's Crimson Dawn and Black Sun, but like the Feline Empire is something that hasn't really been touched, and like it's integral to the whole criminal syndicate stuff of Star Wars. And beyond that, the shell huts. Give us some shell huts. Huts that are in armor. Come on, fighting huts. How cool would that be? Like, oh man.
Yeah, I mean they've done them in the comics, right? Like,
I know.
Yeah.
Like for so many people, I love the comics, and I've been reading them again because I got Marvel Unlimited for Christmas for myself, and like I really enjoy them. But I know that that's kind of like a luxury for a lot of people, or for a lot of people, Star Wars, their experience of it is only the movies or only the live action content, and like I'm very cognizant of that, trying to like I want them to be involved in the weird, like give me some in the Kenobi show, we better get some weird, or at least the Ahsoka show, get some weird cosmic force stuff going on in live action. Like I want to see some like father, daughter, son weirdness, make it trippy, make it strange. Like I want it so bad. I want these philosophical discussions, on screen.
Oh goodness.
That's a whole nother thing. So sorry.
No. And like, I want to see it too. And I want to see complexity of storytelling where it doesn't assume that the story watcher needs to be led to water.
True. No, I think that's
right?
the same thing we were talking about earlier, of like questions that don't have easy answers.
Yeah.
Questions that you have to think about.
That's my struggle with especially Mandalorian season 2.
It's, I once again, love the show. It is very declarative in terms of like the guy who says, best example I can think of is finale. That guy is holding his gun to the clone doctor, saying like, how many people died on the Death Star? Immediately, very, very interesting question that's kind of touched on the Rick Famuyiwa episode. You know, they never mention that. It's something that's very interesting. Immediately shot in the face.
Yeah.
And that question is answered. Like, he's bad. So, you know, if you're going to bring up these things and tease at them, I would love further exploration of consequence, of humanity, you know, in every aspect. That's why the Acolyte is something that very much appeals to me. You know, can get this End of the High Republic stuff. Like, who knows what's going to happen? Are we going to get some Darth Plagueis? Are we going to get some cool Sithy women? Where is Din's Temptress?
I know, right?
Where's the Dark Seductress or whatever it is?
Well, I think that the baby needed to be babysat for him to experience that. So I'm weirdly okay with that. I also think that Grogu's going to come back and be Jedi-like.
Yeah, that's why I'm wondering. I'm very interested if there's going to be some sort of time gap, or like he ages. We don't know. Is it like an accelerated aging after they're out of their infancy? Like, is he 50 and then jumps to being like a 20-year-old? You know, like I'm just the aging.
I think it's canonical that Yoda was a master when he was 100.
So are they gonna have a 50-year? Or I mean, he was a master when he was 100. Okay, so like it could be.
He could like Grogu is probably Padawan material. He just has reverted because of the trauma that he experienced.
I understand, but he is nonverbal.
Like, I know.
He's so young.
They code him as a 5-year-old, basically.
Yeah,
like
so I'm just like
a nonverbal 5-year. Like he's a toddler. Like it's very difficult for me to like reconcile some of the decisions that they made this season. I understand them, but like he's going to come back and he's going to have a lightsaber.
Well, that's what's so interesting is like storytelling wise, I understand every single thing that's been done. You know, it's just I think it comes down to personal preference, and then also like the eternal experience of Star Wars. Like what you want from Star Wars is a discussion that's endless, because clearly what I want and what you want very different from what some other people want. And it's so fascinating to watch the reactions to all these things and seeing, you know, either people being like ebullient and like very, very happy or vexed or confused, or like, I'm just always fascinated by the breadth of reactions to Star Wars content. And I'm sure it will continue as we get more and more shows and people being extremely happy and also extremely angry, and the cycle will continue.
Yep, exactly. I mean, it's hard because like I want Star Wars to tell complex and beautiful stories, and I'm here for that. But I'm also like, you know, I understand trying to ease people into a new storytelling mode and media.
Well, that's what's so interesting about this new, you know, group of content. Like there's now so much, I don't know if everyone's expected to watch all of it, but then how do you contextualize each of these things as an experience that functions as both something that works for new viewers and something that works for your, I mean, isn't that the eternal question, you know?
Yeah.
Something that works for your hardcore, like canon heads, or like, well, obviously Boba has an EE3 blaster, and he wouldn't have used the, you know, the West Star. He obviously lost his father's pistols. And it's like, it is
the weight of the franchise, right?
The weight of collected canon.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and it is the weight of everything that this franchise has built, and it's like, do you alienate people by making it too, I don't know,
niche, weird?
Yeah, too weird, too, you know, whatever. I think my argument to that is always, if you tell a good story, people will seek out more story.
Definitely, I agree,
you know?
And I think that Star Wars is such a behemoth that it can survive some things that are more specific, more singular to a certain group of the audience, where, you know, because people love awards, people love prestige drama. If you were to really go for it, to do like a hardcore, very, very, you know, tight prestige drama version of Star Wars, 8 episodes, I feel like, you know, you could grab every single demographic, but that's just me. It's my dream for like when I go to sleep at night, just thinking about, oh man.
I mean, Mandalorian, Rebels, and Resistance are all award-winning shows.
True. But I would say some of the lesser seen content in the macro, when, you know, in terms of animation.
Yeah.
Because I feel like I know Sky Talkers always says like, animation is the future of Star Wars, or what they say, animation is like
look to the animation. For the
because I
future
feel
of
like
Star Wars.
so often animation really gets like what is special about Star Wars, but then it's always that push and pull of like, how beholden are we to George Lucas's vision, and how far can we push that if we want to stretch into new modes of storytelling and to new depths, and I mean, I guess that's a question that's something for each creator, but it's difficult. Obviously, it's nuanced. It's a nuanced conversation.
I think that they've been asking themselves that question though, like with the Mandalorian. Like, do we use a typical classical score for the Mandalorian? No, we're going to go with Ludwig's like very mad scientist.
Yes.
Synth / reed recorders / combo with classical music. And when they pull out the classical music, it's almost like it just pulls on your heart, how they do it and what they do. And then also like the synth is just like such a solid way to do episodic action, especially.
It's the most dynamic part of the show, probably the most surprising, the most challenging a lot of the time. I'm like, whoa, I was not expecting this. And it makes the experience a lot of the time for me. And
then what they've been able to do with the Unreal Engine backgrounds.
The volume stuff blows my mind all the time. And I, moving into post-COVID world, hopefully, I'm excited to see what it does, hopefully for younger filmmakers with less money, and how that can open up the experiences. I mean, I've said before, but my dream would be for a sort of like creator showcase Star Wars anthology series, which I spoke about with Beatriz, our wonderful editor. But just having imagine having an hour in the volume of Frog Lady and Frog Husband, and just having that's how you get your coffee shop AU people. You can have Star Wars that's not conflict driven. You can have just living, and you did it in the volume. It's not cheap, but it's cheaper than the way you used to make stuff. And I think having different people coming in, even I think what's great about Mandalorian is it's so specific to the writing of Jon Favreau that you can really feel the different directors. It's such an interesting thing because oftentimes I think TV directing is a little bit harder to parse. But given that usually Jon Favreau is the writer, it's really neat seeing how the different directors interpret that. And I think that same sort of thing coming into this sort of one-off anthology thing, I would love just to see Taika go insane on just a 1 hour about Frog Lady. But I know he's already doing his own movie. But that's my dream. It's just I'm so excited about the future of Star Wars, and the broader it gets, I think allows for more creators to come in with a new, that's why I'm so excited about Star Wars Visions, the anime, because you have the people that are coming in with these very distinct life experiences, underrepresented communities and stuff.
It reminds me a lot of the Matrix anime.
Yes,
that came out before.
Animatrix,
yes. It reminds me a lot of that. Is this very specific vision of those storytelling. And the thing that I specifically want is just absolutely more femme gaze behind the camera.
Oh, definitely. I mean, that's why the Leslie Headland Acolyte stuff is really, really exciting.
Yes. But we also got some of the better character-driven moments in this season from Bryce Dallas Howard.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. And I think I was hoping, I mean, I don't know, they didn't mention her. Was it Christy Wilson Cairns? I hope she's still working with Taika on the stuff for his movie.
Yeah, I believe so.
But, Patty Jenkins' Rogue Squadron is interesting. I know that people often say the diversifying of creators is a slow process. I don't really see the reason for that because there's so many qualified creative people, but I am at least appreciative of these small steps that, any sort of giant entity can make, in that we have the Justin Simeon, Lando, not necessarily doing new characters, but if we're going to do Lando, let's give it to one of the most interesting creators out there, black creators out there, Leslie Headland, and then all these people. I am excited about it.
So with the exception of whatever Dave Filoni and John are working on, every other show is non-cis white male.
That's cool. Or what about Cassian?
Oh, yeah. Sorry, but that was already announced. Like all the new announcements.
True. All the new stuff. Yeah. And that's why, like, I'm really, I don't obviously have no inside information, but I am curious with how, like I said, it's pretty neat that you have two people in their late 50s, early 60s being at the center of Boba. And I would love for the directing stable to be as diverse and, people color centric as that creative team behind it, or the stars and stuff. So,
and absolutely. And I think that what we're going to get is, because we're going to get the furthest story of the legacy of Jango from this story. This will be like the longest history of the Fetts. And my hope is that somehow we get him, I think, adopting a son. I think that or a child.
That'd be cool. I mean, I would love to see, like, I love anybody course correcting from their own upbringing in fiction. And I think even thinking about the name, The Book of Boba Fett, makes it feel like
fairy tale.
I hope it makes it feel fairy tale. It makes it feel like it's going to jump around in time, or at least lend some context to who he is now. And I think, for all of the creative stuff that happens, there's so much creativity and so much amazing stuff that goes into Star Wars. But in terms of filmmaking, the filmmaking is still very classical. And I would love if there was something a little bit more, they played around with structure more in the show, because we don't really get flashbacks. And when we do get flashbacks, it's really strange. Like, it's very, like, it's like, whoa, you're surprised when it happens in the Star Wars property.
Well, we've only had 2 flashbacks in all of Star Wars.
I know, right?
Like, and, in live action
it's
shows.
Very strange.
Yeah.
I mean, and so I don't know. There's so much there, as we've spent all this time talking. There's so much potential, and I couldn't be more excited. And of course, on the flip side, anxious about it. But no, that's nothing new. So, I'll watch it.
Well, and I'm looking forward to next Christmas when we actually get to see more of Boba Fett as a brand new convert. I'm really looking forward to chatting about it more.
Well, that's the last thing I'll say, is that, like, I'm just happy that, in a jerkish way, like, I'm happy that so many people I've seen that had no love for Boba and made fun of him the whole time and all this stuff of his sort of kind of embarrassing end and all that, are not like I'm sticking it to them, but, like, I'm happy that he was brought back in a way that was dramatically interesting, and that the interpretation was something counter to a lot of expectations. And that I've been so happy and elated to see so many people brought into the Boba Fett fandom and, like, excited to see him and Tamara Morrison again. And it's just been a really great experience. And I sincerely hope if we get the roundtable thing, I hope that Boba and Bo-Katan actually have a conversation that's beyond posturing. Let's learn who these people are. That's the whole thing. We just want to learn more about Mandalore. We want to learn about all these people, about the Fetts,
It's a hard thing to put like character development into a show that is, like, sort of formulaic the way the Mandalorian is. And I hope that it moves into continuous storyline and out of Adventure of the Week next season.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I would hope.
I think that'd be cool.
I hope Boba's back in The Mandalorian after his kind of side journey and figuring out who he is now, and us through his lens. And then I hope that we get to have some genuine, like, one of the things I loved about the first season of The Mandalorian is the complexity it brought to the character of the Mandalorians as a people. And, like, what that is and how that plays out. And I really just hope that all of that complexity is explored that we talked about through this legacy of Jango.
Definitely.
Yeah. Well, Taylor, thank you for having this crazy long conversation with me.
Thank you so much for having me on. I know we kind of strayed, but I think that everything hopefully was pertinent to the conversation, and I just am so appreciative to be a part of What the Force in a small way, and thank you for having me.
Where can people find you if they're looking for you online?
You can find me at T Foreman, Foreman, Nico, Niko, on Twitter, Instagram. That's pretty much it. Hopefully I'll have some more writing stuff coming up that you'll get alerted to there. And That's
And
where I'll be.
definitely check out his writing. He writes beautifully and has many amazing thoughts about Star Wars and the galaxy far, far away. Cheers. Thank you for listening to What the Force. I'm Marie-Claire Gould, your host. Our music is orchestral music by Christy Carew for What the Force. We have a Patreon at patreon.com/whattheforce. We would like to thank all our patrons, especially those who love and are obsessed with What the Force. Brad, Cheryl Bell, Melody, Night Huntress, In Wild Space, Felicia, How Rude, Anna Perez, Macau Mom, Neil, James, Joe Allen D, Christian Luca, Josh Johnson, Scott C., and Susan. Make sure to like and subscribe on YouTube or leave a 5-star review on iTunes or other pod apps. It helps people find the show. Check out our other channel on YouTube, What the Fiction, for all sorts of other types of fiction. You can connect with us on Twitter at WT Force Show, What the Force Podcast on Facebook, or our website where we have expanded our content to include reviews, metas, and articles, whattheforce.ca, or on our new Discord. Links are in the liner notes. Feel free to reach out and start a conversation. Cheers.